enigma depravatio est. Enigma crudelitas est.
Welcome back, my fellow seekers. Atlantis has inspired many people like director James Cameron and author and artist Yukito Kishiro, who modeled his city of Zalem off of Atlantis and the city of Jerusalem. If you haven't seen Alita Army YouTuber Tamquam Leo's video on sacred architecture in Alita Battle Angel, I highly recommend you do, to see how a designer like me looks at the movie and the legend on Atlantis. I'll leave a link below. But is Plato's Dimensions on Atlantis correct? Well, this researcher by Prof. Richter of Schwabenheim, Germany, may give us a real clue to the true dimensions of Atlantis and its origin. Although I disagree with some of his research, I do think this professor is on the right track. He goes on to hypothesize that Plato's Atlantis was on the river delta, as I've been arguing this whole time before I ever ran across this paper. Now, as a designer, I agree with his rational dimensions on Atlantis. Plato states that Atlantis' dimensions are circular in nature, which I do agree they probably most likely could be circular. But the diameter of the central royal island, he says, is 5 stades, which is actually 925 meters. But the outer diameter of the water ring is 1,295 meters, and the inner land ring is 2,035 meters. The middle water ring is 2,775 meters. The outer land ring is 3,885 meters, and the outer water ring is 4,995 meters. And then he really expands outward with the outer city wall bordering the sea is 24,400 meters. Now, these dimensions are really large, and pretty much the equivalent of something like London. The Atlanteans are supposed to have dug canals more than twice as deep as the modern-day Panama Canal. Moreover, the circumference of the canal around the plain is 1,850 kilometers long, would have been nearly 23 times the length of the Panama Canal. This is indeed unbelievable, even if the Atlanteans had technology instead of the technology of their age. Plato was right when he doubted the information, according to Critias 1:18c. But he knew nothing about the construction of the canals and therefore did not know the reported dimensions were not only incredible but impossible from a technical point of view. The total area of the royal city of Atlantis of 443 square kilometers would have been so great that it exceeds today's London with 303 square kilometers, or 3.2 million inhabitants. Atlantis, a city greater than today's London. The race course for horses was 185 meters wide and 10.5 kilometers long. This is extraordinarily large compared with other courses for horse races with lengths between 1 to 3 kilometers. The bridge over the canals have an unnecessary depth of 30.7 meters. The famous Kowloon Bridge, built in 1375 in Prague, then the capital of German Empire under Kowloon IV, connected the two parts of the city, and that was 516 meters long by 9.5 meters wide. To come to terms with these incredible figures, some authors have made different proposals to divide Plato's figures by 2 or by 10. So does Plato and Solon have something mixed up? Professor Richter goes on to say, we have indeed an example that a famous Greek author gave wrong information by transforming the Egyptian length units into the Greek stades, and this was Herodotus, the father of history, who gave all distances in Egypt in stades, much longer as they are in reality. While he reported all these distances in Greece correctly, the usual explanation for this error is that he was mixing up the Egyptian units of measurements, obviously taken from Egyptian itinerary, before he transformed them into stades. A similar error could also have been taking place while the Egyptian priests narrated the Atlantis story to Solon, and that was Sontius of Sinus. It is self-evident that the priests gave all these distances in Egyptian units of measurement, as they were written in the ancient texts, and Solon wrote them down as he heard them for later transformation into the Greek stades. When he returned to Greece, he had no opportunity for this calculation, or forgotten it. His heirs Drapidas, Critias the Elder, and Critias the Younger found in Solon's notes only the figures without the units of measurements, and obviously thought it must be the states, especially since their time, due to the busy trade with the Greeks, and even the Egyptian people were using Greek states in addition to their own units. The Cretaeus passed this erroneous information onto Plato. I feel this is a very probable error in the long chain of tradition between the Saitic priests and Plato. Which units of measurements was commonly used by the ancient Egyptians? Well, it was the royal cubit, or the meh. The Egyptian meh measurement is 524 meters, and for longer distances, the ket equals 100 royal cubits. One ket is 52.4 meters, or 172 feet. When we take the ket for what Plato called the stade, we get much more probable dimensions for Atlantis than those mentioned before. So the actual size of the plain would be about 16,475 square kilometers. And just so happens that the Nile Delta is a little bit larger at 22,000 square kilometers. The diameter of the central city of Atlantis would be about 6.7 kilometers. The city of Rome in the late times of the Roman Empire of Aurelian had a diameter of about 6 kilometers, with about 1 million inhabitants. But was the central island at 262 meters in diameter big enough to contain all the reported buildings that Plato mentions? The Temple of Poseidon, Cato's royal palace, separate baths for the kings, for private citizens, and for their horses, the guardhouses for the most trustworthy officers, and the sacred grove of Poseidon. Well, this diagram shows a true scale sketch of the central island. It is obvious that all these cited items could be placed here depending on their configuration. The Acropolis at Athens is about 30,000 square meters, compared with the 54,000 square meters of the central island of Atlantis. We can conclude that it makes more sense to take the Egyptian ket instead of the Greek states for getting the better interpretation of the dimensions of Atlantis in Plato's Cretaeus. Professor Richter also goes on to say another clue is in the canals themselves. We know that the tides of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean range between 2 to 4 meters, so there had to have been levees or dams next to the canals. And these dams or levees would have been built from the cut and fill of the canals. From the cross-section of these canals, we can therefore calculate the height of these dams. The triangle cross-section of the canals, with 8.7 meters in depth and 26.2 meters in breadth, is 114 square meters. Each dam has a cross-section of 52 square meters, with a side angle of 45 degrees. Its breadth would have then calculated to be about 12.7 meters, and the height about 9 meters. With the side angle of 30 degrees, and the depth of the dams is about 15.2 meters, and the height of about 7.5 meters. This dam height could have been sufficient also in the case of spring flooding. Also, these canals could have acted like a reservoir to control the flooding within the plain. And Plato hints that there are 2 springs. Now, it's not sure whether these were literal springs coming from the central city, or were they actually rivers diverting away from the city into the delta, and was the city being used like a reservoir system to control the flooding during the springtime or summer floodings. And this kind of makes sense, especially in a place like the Nile Delta. This could be possible to engineer the city to act like this reservoir. YouTuber Ancient Architects has proposed a hypothesis that the Great Pyramids may have acted like a pumping reservoir system. So there may be a connection to the lost city-state of Egypt also acting like a main reservoir, with the pyramids acting as the valve to pushing water into the delta at a certain pressure to control where the water was dispersed, in order to prevent the whole delta from just being a marsh. So the Great Pyramids may have been multifunctional, possibly a tomb with water. I'll leave a link to his video below. Professor Richter goes on to argue that the population density of the plain would be measured by the manpower required for the army. In this regards, Plato may have partially gotten the numbers right. As he states, in regards to manpower, it is ordered that each allotment should furnish 1 man as the leader of the men in the plain who were fit to bear arms, and the size of allotment was about 10 times 10 stades, and the total number of the allotments was 60,000. According to Professor Richter, this means that the supposed average was 200 people per allotment, required to call up 20 warriors per allotment, and each allotment was about 68 acres in size. Professor Richter assumes that there might be half living in the mountains, but I would highly doubt this if we're talking about a river delta oasis, like the Nile. So the density of the plain would be about 363 per square kilometer, the same as the Netherlands, likewise a level country near the sea, famous for its irrigation system. Today the Nile Delta has a density of 1,000 per square kilometer. Thousands of years ago the population would be smaller, So something like 363 per square kilometer is a fair estimate when we know Egypt's population was about 1 to 2 million back during the Old Kingdom. We can also estimate the population of the lost city-state. Atlantis would have been about 4 square miles, or 2,560 acres. Jericho was about 6 acres with a population of 2,000 people. So if we scale that up, we get about 853,000 people. Subtracting the canal surface area, which is about half, would give us a population of about 426,000 people. About the size of Tenochtitlan of 400,000 people. This is a reasonable size population estimate of the real Atlantis. And if Jericho had a population density over 8,000 BC, then it's highly probable that Jericho is a remnant settlement of the Atlantean Egyptians. I think the Atlanteans tried to conquer the whole Mediterranean, which led to separatist movements. And added that with a natural disaster hitting the capital, that marked the beginning of the end of the Atlantean world order. So Dr. Ulf Richter gives us a far more realistic look on Atlantis. I also think the Egyptians give us a clue to the real master plan layout of Atlantis in their hieroglyph or city. I drew up a quick CAD sketch of what Atlantis may have looked like. Looking at the negative space of the glyph, we can assume that the reservoir would have been here, and added with Plato's descriptions and Professor Richter's dimensions, and my interpolation as a designer, this is what I would come up with. So the actual dimensions of Atlantis is 6,655 meters in diameter from the outer city wall, with an area of 35 square kilometers, far more realistic to fit into the geographic determinisms than the 12,668 square kilometers assumed by Plato, or misinterpreted. Now that we know that the states was translated from the Egyptian Ket, it's logical to assume that Egypt is the place where these observations took place. But I'm sure I'll be refining my design to fit to the landscape and practicality of making a city, using the presence of ancient cities in the Middle East like Memphis and Babylon. Also, I think the position of Atlantis would be diagonal to the Great Pyramids, matching to the approximate layout of the constellation of Orion, for which the Mayans also modeled their pyramid layouts. And it is the Orion Nebula that could be seen as the mound of creation, Zet Tepi, the birthplace of civilization. And the Mayans have also had this kind of idea, using the Orion Nebula. So Memphis could be the remnants of this lost city-state of Atlantis. Also, as a landscape designer, I'll be making a 3D recreation of Atlantis to present on my channel, so if you agree with this hypothesis, give this video a like and share it to some key people like Graham Hancock and Brian Forster, and others. In my next video, I will reveal some evidence that something devastating may have actually happened near the Garden of Atlantis. This has been Enigma Seeker. Keep seeking those enigmas.
Enigma depravatio